Hi guys, thanks for joining me. Is the story of Esther truth or fiction? This has been argued for centuries, and no one has ever found proof of it being true. In this video, I'm going to unpack the contradictions within the story of Esther, from researching the historical records of kings, empires, and the corresponding timelines of the characters' existence. I've found that nothing lines up with facts and references to the scriptures. My original reason for exploring the story was my uneasy feeling about the Feast of Purim, the way in which it's celebrated, and the fact that it isn't a feast of the Lord. If you haven't seen the first video of this series, I hope you'll watch to understand where I'm coming from. I'll leave a link in the comments section. If you can stick with me for the duration of the video, I'll try not to drag it out. I'll provide a summary at the end. So now we'll get into the meaty part of this deep dive into the story of Esther. What do the historical records say to establish the time of Esther, Mordecai and Haman being involved with King Artaxerxes, the ruler of the Persian Empire? Oh, and just a thought, in my last video, did you notice at the end of the added chapters that the sentence wasn't finished? It ended with a comma. I wonder what was supposed to come after that, and why wasn't it tidied up by an editor? It's also a bit of a push for fidelity to the Persians, now the Iranians. Makes you wonder whether Mordecai wrote these extra 6 chapters too. In the Douay-Rheims 1899 American edition, they combine edition F with Mordecai's Dream Fulfilled as a chapter 11. So it was the second year of the reign of Artaxerxes the Great that Mordecai and Jeconias were taken by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Taken to Babylon. Jeconiah only ruled for 3 months until March 597 BC, and Mordecai was taken away with him as captives in Babylon, modern Iraq. Not Susa, Shushan, which is the other side of both the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern Iran. Well, that's where Jeconiah was taken anyway. You can find that in 2 Kings chapter 24. But wait a minute, these dates don't even line up. So, is this the right Nebuchadnezzar? 597. Well, Nebuchadnezzar II was known as the greatest king of Babylonia. It was him who destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem and initiated the captivity of the Jewish population. He was born 630 BC, died 561. Reigned from 605. He, Nebuchadnezzar II, is the important part of Jewish history. So we've got the correct Nebuchadnezzar. but Artaxerxes ruled from 465 BC. This is another account of the attack which took both Mordecai and old Jeroboam, they say in this, what they call him back here. Jeconias, same person. Taken in 597 BC. That's a gap of 134 years, plus whatever age Mordecai was at the time. So I started researching the era of the Persian Empire, Cleopatra and Ptolemy. What a mess. There were a number of Artaxerxes, Cleopatras and Ptolemies. No wonder the story can't be proven true. However, I continued. I like puzzles. So, Artaxerxes I was the only king of the Persian Empire, by that name, ruling from the palace of Susa from 465 to 424 BC in Iran. So you can see after Artaxerxes I, there were no more Artaxerxes for hundreds of years that were actually kings. Persian Empire lasted from 559 BC until 331. So this puts Artaxerxes I in the story, but the letter carried to Egypt to Cleopatra and Ptolemy. Which particular couple are we talking about? The Egyptian elites kept their marriages and names within the family. However, the Ptolemaic dynasty didn't commence until 305 BC and lasted till 30 BC. This was after the Persian Empire. Are you confused yet? Then I found this footnote, but the names I underlined don't appear on the Ptolemaic family tree. Several Ptolemies, Greek kings reigning in Egypt, had wives named Cleopatra. This postscript dates the Greek version somewhere between 116 BC and 48 BC. Though this statement above only recognises the man being the ruler, so was that bracket of time within the Ptolemaic dynasty when men ruled alone? And what about the years before and after? Cleopatra VII was the last ruler of that dynasty. Regardless of which Ptolemy and Cleopatra, the time frame of 116 to 48 BC, as the footnote says, was still a long time after the Persian rule of Artaxerxes I over 127 or so provinces, and the duration of the Persian Empire as a whole. And if the story was at the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, like the footnote says, Rome had influence over it all, which probably makes more sense. Otherwise, why would they be notified of Purim celebrations? I don't know. But in 64 BC, Syria was annexed to the Roman Empire. In 63 BC, the next year, Palestine and Israel, known as Judea, were annexed to the Roman Empire which included the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So I've got a map here of the Roman territory, 50 BC. Northeastern Egypt was under Greek governance through the Ptolemy dynasty under the rule of Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII. Though siblings from the same parents, they married. I suppose the political reasoning was that if one was knocked off, the other's right to the throne couldn't be disputed. It happened that a year after their co-rulership in 50 BC, little brother Ptolemy chucked a wobbly because of his big sister's authority over him in decision-making. He was still a child and under the influence of advisors who probably thought a woman shouldn't rule. I read that particular Ptolemy was 10 and that particular Cleopatra was 18. And before their father died, Cleopatra co-ruled with their father. So Cleopatra did a run at Assyria and raised an army. Ptolemy assumed power, and 2 years later Cleopatra returned with the eastern border of Egypt at the city of Pelusium with her army prepared to face her brother. A Roman general who sought refuge from Ptolemy also went to Pelusium but was murdered. This is when she met Julius Caesar. They became lovers, and when Ptolemy found out that Rome was supporting his sister wife to take back her throne, he got scared and drowned himself in the Nile. So then she married the younger Ptolemy XIV. Now the reason for going off on that tangent is the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, had Greek and Syrian blood, though she was born in Egypt, and styled herself as the physical embodiment of the pagan goddess Isis. She had influence over Julius Caesar and therefore also the politics of the Roman Empire. Mark Antony came later, and so did Herod. So apparently a letter was delivered to Egypt declaring the massacre of more than 75,000 Persians by Jewish people, and they were told to be happy about it, to celebrate the Jewish victory every year and be fearful of the Jews and their king of gods. I can't remember where that king of gods with the small g was written, but it was in part of the Story of Esther. It seems pretty obvious that they were all connected. The Jews, Persians, Syrians, Egyptians, Greeks and Romans, not just politically but by blood. Anyway, as far as I could find, the story of Esther and Mordecai doesn't fit within the historical records of the Persian Empire under any Xerxes or Artaxerxes, or the timing of the footnote, hundreds of years later under Roman rule as Alexander the Great defeated the Persians in 332 BC. I also found that Artaxerxes was sympathetic towards the Jewish people across the Persian Empire. And the Romans, at the later period of time suggested by the footnote, were also accepting of the Jewish communities and traditions, understanding that in the story of Esther the king was tricked by Haman, but what kind of powerful ruler wouldn't check the facts? And the story states that the people of Shushan were confused, obviously because they were living together peacefully. So this is another thing that establishes that Artaxerxes I is the correct Artaxerxes. And he supported the Jewish people. And gave them a high level of autonomy. So you find this in the Book of Ezra and also Nehemiah. He allowed them freedom to develop their own culture and religion. And from a different site. Artaxerxes was a Persian king who allowed the Israelites to reinstate biblical practices in their rebuilt temple under the leadership of Ezra, and then allowed them some political autonomy as well under the leadership of Nehemiah. Ezra believed that God put that idea into King Artaxerxes' heart, and Nehemiah believed it was not King Artaxerxes' good graces, but the good hand of God. And while Cleopatra VII ruled Egypt within the Roman Empire, the Jewish people were given the same freedoms. Basically, the records support that it wasn't a problem. Here's an account of the Jews in Rome. Julius Caesar and Augustus supported laws that allowed Jews protection to worship as they chose. Synagogues were classified as colleges to get around Roman laws banning secret societies, and the temples were allowed to collect the yearly tax paid by all Jewish men for temple maintenance. Of course, there had been some upsets. However, they were soon allowed to return and continue their independent existence under Roman law. Now, this is interesting. Jerusalem remained the spiritual centre of worship, of course. The temple had been rebuilt 3 times. Which means that the destruction in 70 AD was the 4th time. This lady must be some kind of a historian. I found quite a lot about her account of the Cleopatras and the Jews. There's a variety of evidence for relations between Cleopatra VII and her Jewish subjects. Profoundly negative portrait of the Queen in the work of Josephus. And she argues that this case against the Queen does not stand up. She confirms a picture of the Queen as continuing the policy of her predecessors with regard to the Jews of the Ptolemaic kingdom by participating in the long-established practice of extending royal support and protection to Jewish places of prayer. The Queen held conversations in person with Hebrews, and perhaps among those very few who stayed loyal to Cleopatra at the end, the courtier Eros may have been a Jew. There's evidence for her patronage and protection of the fundamental Jewish institution of the prayer house. And after Cleopatra, we have no more decrees of asylum, no dedications of prayer houses to Roman emperors. This phenomenon simply disappears with the Roman conquest of Egypt. When Philo the Jew from Alexandria despaired at the destruction of the city's Jewish prayer houses, he insisted that nothing like this had ever happened under the Ptolemaic rule. Egypt at the time had a thriving Jewish community, and many of Cleopatra VII's most ardent supporters were Egyptian Jews. In 1st century BCE, Jews were river guards, police officers, army commanders, and high-ranking officials, and ardent supporters of Cleopatra's line of succession. Egyptian Jews numbered among Cleopatra's supporters in the desert in 48, and they had fought for her during the Alexandria War in 47 BCE, at the end of which Caesar had granted them citizenship. So, I've made a summary here in point form. In chapter 11, verse 4, Nebuchadnezzar took Mordecai with King Jeconiah to Babylon in 597 BC. 11:2 states that it was the second year of Artaxerxes' rule, but Artaxerxes wasn't crowned until 465 BC. That's a total gap of 134 years. Then there's the contradiction in the footnote F11, stating the Greek version is somewhere between 1116 BC to 48 BC. But the Persian Empire ended with Artaxerxes III in 338 BC. In reference to the footnote, the Ptolemaic dynasty ruled from 305 BC to 30 BC. This was after the Persian Empire, as the Macedonian conquest was in 334 BC, which of course equals there was no more Artaxerxes. The timing of the Greek footnote places Cleopatra the 7th here. I made a mistake there. And Ptolemy the 8th as the rulers of Egypt, which still equals no Artaxerxes. Persian Empire had ceased. So, the burning question is, did Mordecai live from 597 BC to 30 BC? Total of 567 years. The name Esther is not recorded as wife of Artaxerxes I, neither is Vashti. His queen was Damaspia, who birthed Xerxes II. By 3 other women he had 5 more children and 11 other children by unnamed wives. If Esther was so important, you'd think she'd warrant a mention. It has been mentioned that Artaxerxes II was the Ahasuerus in the Book of Esther, who ruled from 445 to 358 BC, but he had problems with Egypt. He had 350 wives, no mention of Esther, and his queen was Statira. And then I found this. The king in Esther, Nehemiah and Ezra, probably are the same king Artaxerxes I. Names look differently in different languages. Ahasuerus is Hebrew and Artaxerxes is Aramaic. And this, the name Mordecai could be regarded as an adjective based on the name Marduk, who was the principal deity of Babylon. Meaning belonging to Marduk. Meaning to be strong or bitter. So whether the timing of the story is during the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire, both were accommodating to Jewish autonomy under their rule. This is an ancient painting showing a Persian king with Persian Jews. So after all that research, I'm thinking that the story of Esther is very probably a fairy tale, concocted to reinforce and prolong the Jewish antagonism towards the Palestinians and any nation who goes against them, to create and justify wars used for the benefit of the control and domination of the Roman Empire, old and new, then and now. I believe this is a puzzle that can't be solved. The timeline boundaries and the identification of the main characters have been intentionally blurred to create confusion, causing people to give up on determining the origins of the story, so we just trust the Church. The Church, which was founded by the Roman government and birthed all Christian religions which exist now. Though to gain that worldwide dominance, the Roman rulers and Catholic hierarchy hated, tortured and murdered righteous believers of one almighty creator, rather than many pagan gods or the current Roman emperor. Then they redacted the Holy Scriptures to suit their own triune version of monotheism, adapted the Jewish fear of God for the purpose of control, and then persecuted the Jews for their differences and traditions. What's changed? Very clever. The story still fits the circumstances pretty much, more than 2,000 years later. What do you think? Please leave a comment. Maybe you know more than what I've presented here. Sadly, this creates some issues around trust. It's not that I don't trust the Bible. I just don't trust people. No wonder the world's a mess. No wonder unsaved people don't want to know about Jesus. Religion has a bad track record. Again, I'm thinking this has been a deliberate deception, using the fear of the Lord's vengeance, threats and punishment of the Old Testament God of Israel, whom Jesus actually called the father of lies.